As the world turns on its axis,
You Guyana, me Guyana, land of many waters with 6 races living together.
GlobeSpan is a Guyanese dialogue moving towards the realization of one nation in one Guyana. It's a platform that offers an all-inclusive discussion, with the pros, the cons, the ones that is taken aside, and the ones that stand in the middle. GlobeSpan believes agreeing and disagreeing are part of the nation's building. GlobeSpan believes that every Guyanese voice is part of the nation's building. As we span the globe for voices from the diasporas and those living home, we stand on our commitment that we are all Guyanese working towards one nation in one Guyana.
Coffee and Dr. Jagan, Barbie, she gave us our great sons. Rohan Kanhai, Coffee and Dr. Jagan.
As the world turns on its axis bringing changes, we as Guyanese must adopt to those changes for a better Guyana for all. GlobeSpan stands on its axis with its belief that one nation, one Guyana, one destiny must include voices from all corners of Guyana.
You Guyana, me Guyana, land of many waters with 6 races living together.
Welcome, viewers and listeners, to another edition of Globespan24x7, owned and operated by Mr. Nohar Singh. Joining us tonight for this discussion is, as usual, technical operator Mr. Devin Bissoon. We are discussing tonight a very, very important topic that has been making the news over the last month or so, the legacy of the late President, Dr. Cheddi Jagan. Discussing this important topic tonight is the former President of Guyana, Mr. Donald Rambutar, and Professor Betoram Ramarak, a historian and someone who did a review of a book recently written by Clem Seacharan on Cheddi Jagan and the Cold War. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us tonight for this very, very important topic. As we all know, this month, March, is a very important and historic month for the historic figure of Dr. Jagan. It is the month when he was born, and it is also coincidentally happened to the month when he died and was cremated in Port Moran at the Babujan in Guyana. Let's begin the discussion right away. First, I will invite the President, Mr. Donald Rambutar, to for any opening remarks he may have on Dr. Cheddi Jagan. This being his birth anniversary as well as his death anniversary. Mr. President?
Yeah, but I would say without doubt, Dr. Jagan was probably the greatest public figure that our country has ever produced. To quote Ashton Chase said at least he was the greatest liberator of the 20th century. When Dr. Jagan died, that was his comment. And I think that Dr. Jagan's contribution to Guyana is almost inexhaustible, because I think he made a contribution in every aspect of life in our country. And his lifetime spanned the struggle against colonialism, the internal self-government, which is a kind of a transition. It spanned the fight for democracy, and he had a very short period in the post-independence, post-democratic struggle as president of our country. So there's not a single area, not a single topic that he did not make a contribution to, and a very profound contribution at that. And I think he has been regarded all along as one of the leading thinkers of our country. He has been, there has been a deliberate attempt, both by the colonialists and by detractors, many detractors, to try to belittle his contribution and try to, many following the pattern of the colonialists, tried to demean him in many, many ways. But I think that's almost an impossible job because of the titanic nature of the man. So that is what I'd like to say at the beginning.
All right, so let's ask Dr. Beteram Ramrak to also give some remarks, this being the birth and death anniversary of Cheddi Jagan. Before he does that, I'd like to congratulate Dr. Beteram Ramrak on his book, Alice Bagundai Singh, that recently won the second prize in the Guyana literature for non-fictional literature. Professor Ramrak, congratulations on your achievement. I happen to have read the book as well. It's a fantastic book, and I recommend everyone to grab a copy and have a good read. Do you have any comments, remarks to make with regards to Cheddi Jagan's birth and death anniversary?
Well, good evening, Mr. President, and to the folks out there. You know, when we think of Cheddi, there's a lot of things about his life, you know, that resonate with who we are. I can tell you, growing up about 6 miles away from where he lived, in a place called 19 Village, which we call Bohemia, you know, we had a showcase, like most Indians, in their house where you keep your fancy plates and so on, but you never use them. But in the middle of that showcase, we had 2 black and white pictures. One was that of Mahatma Gandhi, and the other one was that of Cheddi. And there was a permanent garland of flowers, a mala, so to speak, that crowned those 2 pictures. So we grew up with Cheddi. My parents felt he was a guru, but in my house, you know, he was often referred to as the Mahatma. Now, Cheddi, what he did was, for all of us, and again, I want to emphasize tonight that I'm speaking as an Indian. So let me just say a couple of things quickly. One is, when I say his life resonates with all of us, there's a lot of things about him that connects with who we are, obviously. He brought us out of the plantation, right? Give us the right to vote, an extension of the franchise, and so on. And Donald talked about, you know, some of his other, the great things that he has done. So historically, we're looking at a place, you know, where his parents worked in the plantation. I think his father worked in Albion plantation. The mother worked in Port Morant. He comes from a family, again, this resonates with especially my family, which is a large family. You know, there were 6 brothers, 5 sisters. His father was, in a sense, I don't want to say privileged, but, you know, he was a driver. You can't say privileged because he had a large family. A driver, in a sense, would be like a foreman of the estate. He couldn't go far enough, according to Cheddi, because he could not become an overseer, for instance, because those positions were reserved for whites. You know, so Cheddi, you know, made that contribution. He put Guyana on the map. You know, he made us understand that politics is crucial. And I do want to say, I want to read something very quickly, something that I had written to Bertrand Ramcharan about 2 years ago. And this is what he said about Cheddi. Jagan was revered, his image perpetually preserved in the annals of our memory. Yes, absolutely, the man who dedicated himself to saving the world from its inherent imperfections was endowed with a certain spiritual gracefulness, a nimbleness and an essence of presence that was intermittently woven into the fabric of his social character. And I really mean that. I would add that Cheddi, again, resonates with all of us because he was charismatic. Right? So we had that love for him as a leader. He was sincere in his purpose. He was generous in his spirit. And as one person told me recently, if you were to leave your purse filled with money in the presence of Cheddi, or you lose it, Cheddi would look into the purse and he would try his best to find the person who that purse belongs to. So that was a person who we all remember. You know, he was humble. We know he was very humble, and he would speak the language that we understood, right? So he gave us that level of education, which was crucial for us to become part of that that movement and Of course, I know some people would disagree with this, but he was essentially the father of the nation. So that is a Cheddi I remember.
I think I can echo those sentiments. I mean, growing up in Anchorville, where Cheddi himself is from, I remember my mother worshiping him in our little Kutya Mandir in the house. And in fact, I can't think of any family who did not do that. Have great respect, regards, and revered Jagan as much as the Mahatma, if not greater. He, as Ramarak said, he was our Mahatma. So great man indeed, and we are here to discuss him, pros and cons, controversial, non-controversial. I wonder if I could ask the president, the former president, about his own personal lived experiences with Cheddi.
I think it's very, very difficult to speak about that because it's so numerous. It's you don't know where to begin actually. But I had the privilege, one of the people who had the privilege of working with Dr. Jagan, and he was an extremely hard-working man. He dedicated himself completely to his task, which was always at the service of the Guyanese people. He worked tirelessly. He was also a very frugal man in a way, in some sense, in order to try to save money for the party, because at that time the party hadn't much money to save and so forth. And Cheddi hardly wrote anything on a plain piece of paper, on a writing pad or such. He wrote most of the time on the back of other documents, other papers that had the back was vacant, and that is where he wrote a lot of his very important articles and speeches. I'm not sure, I wasn't with him when he wrote the Western Trial, so I don't know if he wrote the Western Trial on the back of those papers as well, but I wouldn't be surprised if he did. And I know that also he hardly used, except when he's posting things abroad to or going to official people or so forth, he hardly used, he always was recycling envelopes and many other things like that, small things like that. He was, as I said, always very hardworking, but he was a very pleasant man too. Although he was very demanding in as far as work was concerned, but he was also very, very, very easy to work with, get along with, and he always was very encouraging of people to promote themselves, develop themselves, to study. And I believe more than anything else, the PPP was, for my generation at least, those of us who grew up in the PPP, was more than just a political party. It has been a university for us, largely because we had Dr. Jagan in the first place, but many other leaders of the party, older leaders, that generation before us, taught us a lot of what was going on in the struggle at the time.
Was like a family as well, with him?
Yeah, he was very concerned about people's welfare and so on and so forth. One of the things that I used to think about was that sometimes to try to protect him from people going and play on his softness, and to try to raise money from him, both him and Janet in that way. But because I remember one time a woman came to the office at Freedom House, and her house was being taken away, and he found out about it, and he went to the court and he wrote a check, or the party's check, in order to pay off for this woman's house, so that she won't be kicked out of her house. And then I had to hustily go and find and raise the money to put it in the bank, because we didn't have that amount of money in the bank. So he needed to be protected too, because at that sometimes he could be carried away, and when we couldn't really afford a lot of the things that people would sometimes play on his emotions and so forth.
I remember visiting a few times, and he would bring fruits to the office. And
Yeah.
coming from New York, he would share those fruits even with me.
Yeah, he was yeah, he never ate, he was never a big heavy eater. Unless maybe he goes out at sometimes and he will go on holidays and so forth. When he goes on holiday, he come back, you will notice that he put on some weight. But at home, when he was working, he wasn't eating heavy meals at lunch, small meals and a lot of fruits, including cane in his meals and so forth. But he was modest, very modest. He wasn't a very difficult man to please as far as food was concerned.
Dr. Amarat, any comments on the president sharing his experiences about the former president, the late president?
Well, you know, I mean, look, he has touched everybody. All of us were influenced by him, and there are a couple of experiences I can share. There are several. I remember once I went to Freedom House. I was trying to do an interview with him. I had about 10 questions on a list. And one of the questions, the first question actually was about an incident that happened, I believe it was 1982, where a fella by the name of Sridhar Lakhan, Keith Monisar, and some others were caught trafficking arms, presumably to enter into Guyana to remove the PNC regime. So I was curious about that, and I asked him, how does he feel about that? And keep in mind, I had 10 questions, and I had questions about class and race and so on, because I was a student. I was trying to get as much as I could from him. He went off. What I remember from that conversation is a long diatribe, and he spoke for an extensive period of time, and the word adventurous came up, and it's all about class, it's about revolution. So I couldn't get to the other questions because he had to leave for a meeting. We had brought them up here in New York. Vishu was part of that with Ravi Dev and others to an Indian conference. We had brought him, Basdeo Pandey, the deposed leader of Fiji. And this is another interaction I'm sharing. So we've had passed some resolutions about what was happening in Guyana. Yusuf Prasad was also there and some others. I can't remember all the name. So we sat down and we drafted a resolution. And I was a little surprised that he used the word apartheid, condemning the PNC government for apartheid and so on. So I was a little taken aback knowing what I knew about him at that time. And I would share one more example, which I think is important for us to understand, because I hope we can discuss this later. Following the election after 1992, he had come to York College in New York. It was a multi-ethnic crowd because everybody was happy to see him. He was there and he made a speech. And in that auditorium, there was a young Indian fella who was pacing up and down during his entire speech. He wanted to ask a question about what are you going to do about the people who have violated the rights of Indians. And he was very specific. He gave some information about family members. What I was taken aback about was when Cheddi went into a response and he used words like, "You're racist, we have to bring the country together," without understanding the humanity and the perspective from where that person was bringing that question. So I felt he didn't really answer that in a way to that person's satisfaction, so to speak. But that was the quintessential Cheddi. And there are some other incidents where, we as students in City College, we had brought them up, to have various meetings. And this was at a time when there was hardly anyone out here who was willing to come to listen to him. We would take him from one apartment to the next, and he would, they would collect money and take it back to Guyana. So those are some memories I have. I have some others, but of course, as I got a little older, I began to look at, some of his writings and what he was doing. And, as you get older, you get a little smarter and you wise up a little bit. And you start to question some of the things he was doing. And I was studying politics at the time, and there were people who were connected to the PPP who I had met. And we used to have some discussions. So some ideas started to flow in my head. And I started to raise questions. And I think Donald would know, be aware of some of those things that I had written. In fact, me and Donald go back, way back. He will tell you, we have been interacting in the media years before. So I think he knows where I'm coming from and some of my concern. And I remember telling him not too long ago when he came to New York with Anil, that my concern here would be about Indians. And I think this would be one of my concern that I try to share with Cheddi, but not to say that he didn't care, but I think his views, his Marxist views, in a sense, minimize that concern. And I was a little troubled about that.
I think Dr. Ramrak mentions, yeah.
Let me say quickly here, I object to the word that Dr. Jagan is a long diatribe. I never know that Dr. Jagan speaking a lot of diatribe. And secondly, I think some of her reflections, maybe your memory is a little bit fuzzy. As far as I remember, a lot of time when Dr. Jagan went to New York, I never accompanied him on those trips. But I did get information from people who were there from New York, Dr. Raj Singh and many others who were there. And I thought that he was, your group was picketing him when he went to the GoPO conference and several other public meetings that he went to. Your group that where Bishram said was formed in 1977 was not formed as a support group to Dr. Jagan or to the struggle in Guyana. You were formed to also try to bring down Dr. Jagan. You were most of the time on the attack against him. And then even your comments about his attitude to people, I can't make a comment on the specific issue, but I know that Dr. Jagan never avoided any issues, and he dealt, if you look at all his writings, he dealt with the racial question frontally. He never avoided it. He dealt with it frontally, but it is also true that he felt that class was more important than race. That and his more of his analysis was class analysis, but he also made racial analysis as well when that was important for him to do. He never avoided any issue. To speak about him as avoiding talking or dealing with the racial questions would be a total misrepresentation of Dr. Jagan. I don't think there's anyone, for that matter, who dealt with the racial question as profoundly and as consistently as Dr. Jagan. He's always described the PNC government as racial and political discrimination. If you look at all of his analysis and description of the actions of the PNC, it was always the racial and political discrimination that the PNC government was practicing since 1964 in the country. So Dr. Jagan never shied away from the issue and pretended that it wasn't important.
Well, let me say,
yeah,
you know,
well, if I may, I don't know if any group ever picketing Dr. Jagan at any time. No. Not when he was.
That could be verified very easily. All you got to do is pick up the phone and call people like Dr. Raj Singh, who, with the ACG in New York, was the real group that really supported a lot of Dr. Jagan's activity out there. And there some other people, you had Chuck Mohan and them were out there also helping out and so forth. But as far as I know, your group was fundamentally picketing Dr. Jagan. I don't know
no group ever picketed Jagan. No, those opposed to him, those for him, no group ever picketed Jagan, as best as I know. I'm telling you factually.
Although I wasn't there, I'm sure of what I'm speaking about.
But that's the key, Donald. You were not there, and you asked me for my experience, and I'm sharing it with you, and now you're telling us you were not there.
But I know
let Ramrak speak on that fact.
I was quite senior already in the PPP at that time, in the 70s and so forth, and I was elected to the Central Committee of the PPP in 79. I was at Freedom House since 1975. So I was quite aware of what was happening in all of those times. I had full reports of those things, what was happening.
No, there was no pick. I'm telling you factually, there was no picketing exercise. Ramarak?
No, well, it's a matter, and this is the problem. You see, Donald likes to make things up, but all due respect to you, Mr. President, see, and you have a way of using words. You like to, in the past, you've said people like us, or upper class, as if that's a crime. You said we were with the CIA. I think recently in the letter that you wrote, we're in a sense nationalists. I guess you're saying we're racist.
I didn't want to call you.
No, but you use the word nationalist. But here is the problem, and I want to see if I can make you understand this. And I'm not trying to be facetious here, but there is a tradition, and you know this. Let me just say this very quickly. In the past, we have had debates with Janet. All of the things that she has written about us that we responded to, it's on the PPP website. But the response that we give is not there. Your response to everything we have written is on the website, but ours is not there. So the question is, are we looking at freedom of interaction, freedom of speech? Here's the other thing. Let me just finish the thought that I have in my head here. You can't make things up. You and Clement, and I'm not trying to be personal here, when all the intellectual ideologues left the PPP, to use a Marxist jargon, the lumpen, people like you, yourself, and Rohi were sent to Czechoslovakia to study, and you were doing propaganda work. So I know that's key to you. But here's what I'm saying to you. You can't use that and manufacture information and look at what we are saying. All I'm saying to you about Cheddi, with that point that I'm trying to make about we try to support him because we were looking for that Indian element in him. Now you may say, look, he had universalist values, he was fighting for the world, the international proletariat, that's all well and good. But the fact remains that people like yourself, and maybe not Cheddi, people like yourself, and by the way, Clement Rohi, and I'll reveal this to you, and I know you do this also. Clement Rohi writes in the Stabric News. He's a regular blogger. He uses the name Rakhi Sangh. And for somehow, he's fascinated with this whole notion of the issue with Balaram Singh Rai. He always mentions it. Now, he's probably going to be pissed that I mentioned this. Now, and you have a tendency to bring up things like WISMA. But let me tell you something about WISMA, right? Because you're telling me that, we're... I'm trying to show you where you're erring by saying that we're focusing on the Indian element, because you're the ones using the word nationalist. And then you're comparing us with in that letter that you wrote, you're comparing us with Hamilton Green. Yes, that is total disrespect. That is absolute nonsense for you to say that, to equate what we do. So let me ask you this, Donald. If we are Indian racists, where was your voice on January 12th? Were you too busy being General Secretary? When Indians were beaten on the street.
I was very
Indians
busy
were beaten on the streets in Georgetown.
Getting people home and working to get people home and dealing with it politically. I was on the radio and I was on the television talking about these things all the time. I was forefront.
Okay, fine, fair enough. Let me ask you about this. Let me ask you about this one. Let me ask you about this one, and then you can continue.
What wisdom that you're talking about? I don't know what you're talking about.
Let me tell you what I'm talking about. Here is your quotation. This is your quotation about WISMA. You were writing something about the indentured, and somehow in there you brought this up, and you like to bring up WISMA for some reason. Now, here's what you wrote. I'm going to quote you. No, here is your words. These are your words. The real reason for the disturbances in the 1960s, which culminated in the ethnic cleansing of Mackenzie, now Linden, is often masked by some historians still infected with a colonial mentality as a racial problem. It was not. Basically what you're saying, you're throwing out everything that the Commission of Inquiry said. This is your writing in the Kite news. These are your words, Mr. President. I'm not going to lie to you. My mother, my dear mother taught me not to lie. This is your words. But let me tell you something. This is not a racial issue.
Which the date of the paper it was published, so we can check it back. We can go on the internet.
I'm going to send it to you because my reputation is on the line. But these are your words. But let me tell you something else. Janet Jagan, and this is what I keep saying, talking about the Indian issue doesn't make you a racist. Janet Jagan, when Wisma occurred, she said this was a genocide. You are busy, and rightfully so. You're busy condemning the Holocaust in Gaza. Yes, all of us should condemn that. But when those Indians were beaten up on January 12th, you didn't speak out. Janet Jagan did not want those people to do a report, an investigation. Wisma, when it happened, Janet Jagan, who was so steeped in her Jewishness, she told Devedin that I was proud to take Cheddi Jagan to the state of Israel when it was just formed. She was so concerned about her whiteness, her Jewishness. When the violence occurred in January 1998,
all you saying there was utter nonsense.
It's in your magazine. It's in the thing. You publish a magazine called The Thinker. You are on the editorial board. It's there. Don't deny it. It's there.
Just stay quiet a little bit. I never went to Czechoslovakia to study. That's the first instance where you're wrong. I never went to
Eastern Europe.
Secondly, I neither me nor Rohi ever went to Prague to Czechoslovakia to study.
You went to Eastern Europe.
The second thing is PPP, Janet Jagan resigned as Minister of Home Affairs because of what happened in Linden. And she wrote a very long letter stating what had happened and condemning the racist attack against Indian people. The PPP statement condemned completely what has happened. Dr. Jagan himself as premier on the 31st of May made a national broadcast condemning what took place in Wisma and called it a racist attack. And Cheddi Jagan was always clear in calling a spade a spade. So what you're talking there, you're just manufacturing things to justify the Indians who betrayed our struggle, and you try to make them heroes. That's all you're trying to do. Because something's wrong with you people with that.
This is the problem, Donald. This is the problem. You see, what the problem is, you think that those who share a different opinion are outcasts, and they should be branded as outcasts. And I don't think Cheddi was so heartless and vindictive that he would have suggested that those, especially those Indians who oppose him, should have been treated that way. You have a tendency, again, you have a tendency to look at those Indians. Let me tell you something. When Mahatma Gandhi was not the only person. There were many people. Cheddi stand on the shoulders of other people. You have to recognize that.
That you're talking about.
Well, we can't talk over each other. Cheddi stands on the shoulder of other people who were there. Martin Luther King did not become Martin Luther King because you had people like Malcolm X, the Freedom Riders, you had, Baldwin and all of those. Same thing with Mahatma Gandhi. There were other people, Lala Lajpat Rai, you have Bhagat Singh and all of those people. But people don't condemn them for what they do. But you and Clement Rohi have a tradition of condemning those people who actually participate and did things, because you now see them as outcasts because you don't see ethnicity as a concern. And this is where the Marxist element comes in, because Marxists believe that ethnicity will disappear, and that has been the tradition. But you don't understand how that works, because Guyana is a plural society, and that is one of the problem. One of the problem today, when you emphasize so much the whole notion of class analysis.
Let me just say, I think you totally, I don't think you know anything about Marxism, because when you say that Marxism don't deal with race, all that Marxism does is say that the class issues are the more fundamental issues. It doesn't mean that they don't deal with other issues, of race and nationality. In fact, it was Lenin who came up with the concept of the right of nation to self-determination, which was adopted by the United Nations, which shows you that they dealt with all kinds of issues in a very profound way. So I think that I mean, sorry to say this, because but just from all the things that you've written that I read, and talking with you, I think that your opinion of Marxism doesn't come from reading Marx. You probably read somebody else and talking about Marx, because you're really ignorant about the subject. I must tell you that. Secondly, the other, I think, let's talk about issues. Let's not talk about us, what you did, because that letter that you quoted just now, I have absolutely no, it doesn't even sound like me.
It is you. It is you.
All right, but he said he will send it to you.
You should have come with a date and the time about the article and let me hear the article, but you would come with nothing. And I repeat again that your group was not helpful to Dr. Jagan. You were never helpful to Dr. Jagan. You were always hostile to Dr. Jagan, and you always harassed him whenever he went to United States, even when he was lobbying or raising funds or anything like that. Your group was never helpful to Dr. Jagan. So now that he's dead and he can't speak for himself, but there are many of us who still knows what went on at that point in time.
Okay, so again, I will debunk that by telling you that from my experience going from 77 to 92 and later, no one ever picketed Dr. Jagan. No one opposed him publicly. No one did. In that's all the they would have, whoever it is inform you of that, they will have to show pictures of us picketing the man, because whenever it came,
I believe that there are pictures available.
Get the pictures and you'll see that they're wrong. You won't be able to get those pictures. Anyway, let's talk about Dr. Jagan again. Do you think he possessed leadership qualities that today's leaders can learn from?
Is it for me, Vishnu?
I'm with the president first.
I think Dr. Jagan's work is inexhaustible. I believe that everybody can learn from his activity, and I believe that very few people, at least none in the Caribbean, they were probably in the wider world, they would be, but very few people operated with the kind of restrictions and difficulties that he had to administer, he had to work under, and achieved as much as he did. The professor there mentioned that how Dr. Jagan gave them all of that, but he forgot that just before Dr. Jagan came on the political scene, we were all living in low G's. My grandfather and my father was born in the nigger yard at High Flat. It was the same houses that the slaves used to live in, that they were living in, and so forth. And there was no person, no leader, or no political party, because I wouldn't say that Dr. Jagan alone achieved all of these things. He was the leader, but he had a lot of very capable people with him. Transformed Guyana. If you look at many, look at some of the people who wrote about the study of the West Indies as being necessarily the study of poverty. Look at many of the describing British Guyana, that the poverty and the squalor in British Guyana was worse than any place in the Caribbean. Yet in 1963, Professor Peter Newton said that you will not find the poverty in British Guyana as you will see in Trinidad or in Jamaica. And the housing, in the first year, less than a year, the PPP in government in 1957, more than 1,300 houses were built in that half year. We did a lot for the housing. Education was transformed so that we built a university. The health services was transformed. The biggest hospital in the Caribbean was built at the Georgetown Public Hospital. And I mean, they're too numerous to mention about all that Dr. Jagan had achieved in that time when he was opposed by the British, by the Americans, by the local people who were financed by the CIA and so forth to oppose him. So the quality of leadership that Dr. Jagan provided, it probably could never be repeated, that type of leadership that he did to achieve so much in such difficult circumstances.
Let's have a break, and when we come back, you can respond.
1 minute. GlobeSpan 24/7 is serving the community for over 2 years. We hope that the programs have been of value to you as we continue to connect with the issues and politics that matter to you. Support GlobeSpan 24/7 initiatives by logging on to Globespan247.com. Click on GlobeSpan 24/7 talk shows and make a contribution. Your contribution will help to build a better platform for the communities. On GlobeSpan 24/7, you can also download the player for Roku TVs, Samsung TVs, and Android TV boxes. You could also download the GlobeSpan 24/7 channel on your Android mobile phone. Support GlobeSpan 24/7 and also support the companies that support GlobeSpan, such as TravelSpan and allfromonesupplier.com.
Unveiling a literary masterpiece, Challenged Sovereignty by Dr. Ivlaw Lloyd Griffith. This book demonstrates how drugs, crime, terrorism, and cyber threats converge, shaping the destiny of the Caribbean. 12 years in the making, this groundbreaking study unravels the complex tapestry of challenges facing the Caribbean, including regional analysis and compelling case studies. Grab your copy of Challenged Sovereignty by Dr. Ivlaw Lloyd Griffith with an exclusive 30% discount at the University of Illinois Press or available on Amazon.com.
So welcome back, viewers and listeners, to this ongoing discussion on the legacy of Dr. Cheddi Jagan of Guyana. Professor Bertram Ramarak was going to respond to former President Donald Rambutar.
Well, Vishnu, I think your question was about leadership, right?
Yes.
I'm not going to disagree with what the former president said. Obviously, Cheddi had, leadership skills, right? But in terms of a person, he was well likable and so on. But politically, I do have to say that, and again, my mother always told me not to speak ill of the dearly departed. But we have an obligation, we have a duty to examine who we are, where we are, and look at history. When people say, well, that's in the past, well, history has a tendency to repeat itself. So from my perspective, everything that he has done, and I think the most progressive period was from 1957 to 61, right? Were some of the things that Donald mentioned that he had done. The problem is this, and I'm going to at least identify 3 or 4 issues that we see, which people are beginning to write about, because history is not always settled history. We don't know, for instance, what information is held in the Cuban archives or the Russian archives, and when that information is out, maybe all of our perspective, including Donald's and myself, will be changed. But there are a couple of things here that, based on where we are right now and with the information we have, one of the problem which I see, well, obviously during that time in the post-World War II period, most third world leaders were Marxist oriented. Many of them were. However, not many of them were loyal to the Soviet Union. Of course, there was Bandung, and then you had the non-aligned movement and so on. So Cheddi is unique in that sense. So he became ideologically attuned to the Russian cause, hook, line, and sinker, right? Very loyal to that cause. And that created problems for him. I mean, I can give you an example. When he came to meet Kennedy in October 61, a person connected to the British colonial office advised him and give him the language to use when he meets with Kennedy. This was the time you had the Bay of Pigs and so on, and America was concerned. Obviously, Cheddi met with Kennedy. He went on Meet the Press, and he began to use language akin to scientific socialism. So my point here is that there were mistakes that were made ideologically, not necessarily because of his Marxist orientation, but the fact that he was closely aligned in during the Cold War with the Soviet Union, and that created complications for what he was doing domestically at home. So that would be one issue that I think is well documented, even though Donald may not want to accept that. And I think this is really what Clem C. Chiran book was all about. I don't agree with everything Clem C. Chiran has written, but the point is he has legitimized that whole notion that Cheddi was closely aligned to the Soviet Union, and that created complications for us in Guyana. Secondly, one of the complications that created was the fact that Cheddi became an enabler of the Barnum dictatorship. 1975, you had this movement towards, nationalization. In fact, when you look at the PPP literature, the notion of party paramountcy was written about in those genres in the Thunder. So it goes back there. So you've got this whole notion of critical support coming into play because Barnum was nationalizing Denver. Cheddi wanted him to nationalize Booker's. He got that. Incidentally, there were people, and again, this goes back to Clement Rohi's book, My Story, My Song, where he talks about a meeting with some credible people, well-known people like Jailal Kisoon, Ganraj Kumar, Ayub Idun, Dudnat Singh. Now we can say, well, those may be elites according to Donald, but the point is they question Cheddi about this whole notion of, what Barnum is doing would be anti-Indian and so on. And you got to be careful, how you support him. Of course, Rohi writes and address those people as the Indian racist bogey. That term always comes up. And this is what I'm saying, because there's a tendency among folks here to keep Cheddi on a pedestal, which we all want to do, but at the same time, you want to disparage all the Indian leaders, who work with him. So here's the other point I want to make. So you've got enabling a dictatorship, right? And the other issue that I mentioned before is that because the emphasis was on class, the whole notion of ethnicity and race was not given the consideration that it should have been given. And this is why we find ourselves today in a divided, plural society, right? So those are three things that I think are crucial. But I want to go back to this thing that I keep saying about this whole notion of when we question these policies, it should not be a reflection to defend someone. It should be a reflection of encouraging critical thinking, right? And we can have that discussion. Otherwise, we're not moving along. That is really what the dialectics is all about, if you want to use a Marxist jargon.
Okay, Donald.
Yeah. First of all, you're making statements and you're not giving any concrete example. I don't know how you can say that has to be a deep prejudice against Dr. Jagan, which is deep in your psyche, it appears, to say that Dr. Jagan enabled the PNC dictatorship. The PPP fought against the PNC often alone. From 1964 to 1973, the PPP was practically alone fighting against the PNC. Other forces started coming from 1973. To say that the PPP, to me, that is so absurd. It's nonsensical. And the other point you made, that you're making so much of points that seems to be like rum shop gaff. Really can't settle down with them properly. Dr. Jagan. You said, I don't know how you said that the critical support. Let me talk about critical. You mentioned critical support. Critical support came about at a special time in our country. It came about at a time when the Venezuelans were threatening our country's invasion. And Dr. Jagan worked out the line of critical support. One of the message of that critical support was send a message very clearly to the international community, to the Venezuelans, that we will not allow our political differences with the PNC to facilitate any attack on the sovereignty of this country. That was part of it. And the critical part of it was that we will not stop criticizing the PNC, for the social and economic policy that they had. And you can't take Dr. Jagan out of context and say critical support as if he just supported the PNC for no reason at all, that nothing, without taking the whole political context of the situation at hand. It was a very difficult time for the PPP, because you remember in 1973, the PNC massively rigged the elections. So for Dr. Jagan to come out with that position showed his patriotism, that he was not going to stand by idly to allow the country, this was beyond boredom. He was not going to stand by idly and see that the country being attacked from outside. And that was a clear message that he's going to support the government in resisting any attempt at that regard. And the critical part was that I'm not going to give up my criticism on the PNC for what they're doing. But you seems not to understand that, and you continue to say that that was a support for the PNC without taking to the political context of the times. What were the other points you made again? But Clem Teacher, man, let me tell you something, Chief, and I'm saying it very bluntly. Clem Teacher is one of the most dishonest historians that I've seen. The book that he wrote about Jock Campbell, he wanted to make Jock Campbell look good because he was paid to write, he was commissioned to write the book. So he had to turn somebody into a criminal. He turned Cheddi Jagan as a criminal in that regard. And I have not seen any, I've read a lot of the newspapers at the time. And every single newspaper that I read about Jock Campbell, which he obviously should have read too, Jock Campbell was in strong support of Dr. Jagan's economic policy. He was very, very strong in support. In 1962, the Calder budget, he said that there was nothing better than that could for British Guyana at the time. He addressed it in 1963. March of 1963, he addressed the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce, and he told them that he has every confidence in the government, and the Booker's group of companies, which was 12 companies at the time, were going to invest another $8 million in the economy, which was a princely sum at that time, because he thinks that the government, the PPP, was managing the country in a very, very sensible way. I have not found one criticism that in the newspaper of the time, in all of Jack, I can read some of them for you because I walked with some of them here for you to say. Jock Campbell also said the same Port Morant estate that Clemcy Chiran wrote about, that is a wonderful estate, and a man named Gibson created some wonderful things. So people in the Port Morant were living like kings. Jock Campbell said that he has never seen, when he went there for the first time, he's never seen such poverty in his life. Never seen such poverty in all his life at Port Morant, as he saw in Port Morant, where Dr. Jagan grew up in. So when you quoting Clem Fitzgerald as an authority, I think Clem Fitzgerald is very, very biased. I know that he's a beautiful writer. I wish I could write like him. I wish I could string words along as beautifully as he does. But the content of what he writes is extremely biased, because I won't say that he doesn't know. I know that he must have read all of these things. And the fact that he's hiding these things, the same way you are hiding a lot of things, tells me a lot about your real attitude to Dr. Jagan.
Well, Donald, Mr. President, you can't pick and choose. Jack Campbell did offer Cheddi 51, 49% in 68 and 60. 68 and 60. That's documented in the book. But let me just say this. Hold on a second. Let me just say something.
The government. And I want you to show me where, because after I heard you say that.
Get a copy of the book. It's in the book.
Yes, I have. I don't have the latest book, but I have his Jock Campbell book. And because of that, I looked for everything that Jock Campbell wrote in that period, And there's never one single mention of that by Jock Campbell in any document. You find the document and show me where Jock Campbell made that offer.
You have to go into the book. But let me say this. Let me just say this. We can't pick and choose. If we don't like something, we be discarded. And if we like it, then it's okay. You're saying, okay, you're saying the book is commissioned.
No, right now I can.
Hold on a second. Let me just, I want to respond to what, I want to respond. You see, we have to recognize that the truth is not only coming from you or people, you know, who you associate with. We have to be able to look at things critically. That is in nature. That is the nature of our existence. Now, I don't agree with everything Clemcy Charan. All I did was I simply reviewed the book. But what I'm saying to you is this. You have people who will make, and to your credit, Mr. President, you did say you did not read the book. It's a big book, right? And it covers from 46 to 92. Okay. Now, but
according to your review.
Yes. Okay, then you can read the book. But the point is, just so you know, I was also asked by the publisher, Ian Randall, to review the original manuscript. And I can tell you that I don't agree with everything Clemcy Charan has said. I don't agree with his views on India or his views on the caste system. But the point is, it's a book, but we don't just throw the baby out with the bathwater. We have to be critical in terms of what we're saying. But let me say something about, you know, to extend on this point. I see Ralph Ramkaran also wrote, like you, he's doing the same thing like you. He's saying Mr. Clemcy Charan is of modest accomplishment. Clemcy Charan, and again, this is why I'm saying to you, being a person who's concerned about Indians does not make you a racist or an Indian nationalist, as you put it. Clemcy Charan wrote an important book about a person I never heard of, Bechu, whose actual name was Boshunath Chattopadhyay, a Bengali. He did not mention the name of the person. He called him Bechu, but it was Odin Ishmael who actually dig up the actual name of that person. So there was something important there. But the point I'm trying to make is when you have people, intelligent people like yourself and Ralph Ramkaran in his Sunday article writing about, well, this guy is of modest accomplishment, you're just on a scene where you want to throw everything out the room. You want to throw the sink and the water and the pipe and everything out without even looking at it. But Ralph has never read the book. Right? And I would hope you read the book. And like I said, I don't necessarily agree with everything that they say, but I just happen to review the book. So if you're saying it's commissioned, so then let me ask you this. When that book that's coming out on Cheddi Jagan by Patricia Mohammed, which is commissioned by Freedom House, should we question what is being written in that book?
Yes, why not? You can do what you want with it, but if those who could defend it, and if you can defend the position, that's good. But I don't think Clemcy Charan can defend a lot of the things that he said about Dr. Jagan.
But you can't criticize unless you read the book.
Let me make this other point to you. Most of your criticisms, most of you and Charan's criticism of Dr. Jagan is that he didn't play ball with the Americans, that he took a principled position for sovereignty, for independence, and you blame the people of this country voted for Jagan over and over at free and fair elections. You want Jagan to betray them? That is what you wanted Jagan to do.
But let's be honest, mostly Indians. Mostly Indians.
Hold a minute. Let me make a point to you just now. You just said something. You threw me off again. But let me just make the point, say that Dr. Jagan's position, your main concern with Dr. Jagan is that he didn't play ball to be in government, so that for you haven't said. I'm not saying that you said it. But implicit in all of your writings and all of your suggestions is the whole question that you didn't want Barnum Beep on top. You wanted Akuliman to be on top. You wanted Jagan to be on top. and therefore you wanted Jagan to compromise his principles.
Here again, you're filibustering and you're saying things. You're filibustering all of Donald. You know me, all of our lives. Me, you see, you mentioned the Indian nationalists in your article, but you never mentioned Ravi. You never mentioned Ravi Dev. You never mentioned Ravi Dev, who would have qualified to be your Indian nationalist, and you know fully well all of our writings, Mr. President, all of our writings, you know, if you want to be honest, has been geared to finding solution to this racial problem that we are stuck with. You understand what I'm saying? And you know that fully well.
If you examine, I think you should pause and examine your position, and you will find a lot of similarity with you and David Hines. There's plenty of similarity with you and David Hines, except you're on the
in that letter, you already placed me in the category, with Hamilton Green. So now I'm with David Hines.
That group. The point I'm making
and
is
plus
that
I'm CIA, I'm a wealthy Indian.
The point I want to make to you, if Dr. Jagan did what you and all your other so-called people who support you or in your group did what you wanted him to do, he would not have been any better than Bonham, and he would not have been able to achieve anything that he achieved. In fact, in 1955, this argument is not a new argument. In 1955, exactly a month before the party was split, when Dr. Jagan became convinced that there was a movement operating against him to throw him out of the party, he dealt with all the arguments then. The argument then was, let us try to fool the British. He wrote an article in the Straight Talk called The Way Backward in the end of January or the middle of January 1955, the 15th of January, I think, 1955. And he said, I think I have it near me here. And he said then that if they were saying that if you try to fool the British, to fool them and tell them that, and make them believe that you are with them and so forth, and then they will give us back our constitution. He said that wouldn't happen. But he went on to add this important point, that even if you succeed in throwing out all of us who you say are extremists or what have you, then what would you be able to achieve? Because you make yourself a puppet. You make yourself being controlled from outside, and you cannot then be a patriot and fighting for the betterment of your people if you turn a puppet of a foreign power. And Dr. Jagan was very, very principled as far as sovereignty was concerned. Now, the question about communism that you talk about, again, the lady who wrote a book which you should try and get called Salvaging Democracy, Dr. Jane Sillery, who is the head of the history department at Oxford University, where you use British Guyana.
It's a PhD dissertation. I don't know if it's a published work, and it only covers 4 years.
It is published now, and in it, she pointed out that positions that you have taken and your group has taken, those people in the 60s who took similar positions, she said that they contributed to many of the problems that happened in this country because they were spreading this anti-communism thing about Cheddi Jagan. And let me mention this to you. The British used the anti-communism in a very liberal way. They were calling anybody who did not compromise the struggle for sovereignty. Even Banda from Uganda was described as a communist. George Price was described as a communist. It's everybody who did not go along with exactly what they wanted. Banda opposed federation for the African countries then, and they called him a communist. So all of these things, when you parrot-like repeating what the British were saying about communism and so forth, I think you should look at it in the context of how it was being used at that time.
Donald, nobody needs.
Yeah.
But let me just say, nobody needs to tell us what happened during that period. We were there. That is our lived experience. You don't need to tell, T-E-L-L us. We were there. We know what we saw. We know what we felt. What I'm saying to you, that is one of the problems we had to deal with. And for you to simply brush that off, you're looking at a period where the people who formed the bulk of Cheddi Jagan support, primarily Indians. Let's not forget that. Those were the people who were forced to leave. They had to leave. They were the ones who felt. All I'm saying to you, and you keep equating me with people who we have been challenging almost every week to defend the PPP by challenging their perspective. And that is very shameless, I have to tell you that. What I'm saying to you, our lived experience means that we were forced to leave a country where our voice was being silenced. It wasn't given the kind of, we never said we wanted Cheddi to be a racist or whatever, however you defined it. All we are saying to you is that the problem in Guyana today remains with us because the focus on class as the major division in Guyana and the belief that racism and ethnicity will disappear, right? Because it's false consciousness. That's how the Marxists look at this. That didn't happen. If we had focused more on that, maybe we could have come to a point where we recognize that we can deal with that situation. And you know, if you want to be honest, we have been promoting a number of ideas which we think can be solutions to this ethnic problem. It's not going to disappear quickly. I can tell you, yes, the PPP is doing very well. And if I was in Guyana today, I will go with you to the polling booth and we will vote for the PPP. But the problem still exists. Maybe we are better off today because there are younger people who may be gravitating, and there is evidence to that, towards the PPP. That's all well and good. But we're looking at that time period in context. I'm saying to you, his ideology, and again, Naipaul once says that most Indians are not critical, they don't read. You look at the people who are studying social studies at UG, look at the number of people who understand. I mean, look at the curriculum, how many people are talking about Indian history. But let me share this with you. This is 1985. Cheddi, you can't make the argument that Cheddi would not have gone the way of Cuba. First to begin, he was in charge of a colony. And by the time he get back into power, the Soviet Union had collapsed, right? So you can't make that argument. But this is the quintessential Cheddi. These are his words in the 1985 PPP Congress. He said, "We are generally recognized as and accorded the status of a communist party by all other fraternal parties," meaning the parties in Eastern Europe. And don't tell me these are not his words, right? The prestige to continue of our party, both locally and internationally, has never been higher. This is 1985, a few days before Barnum died. We can say with confidence on this 22nd Congress that our party has been transformed into a communist party. The man was wholeheartedly, I'm not saying, you know, he was crazy, but that was an ideology. It was like a religion that guided his behavior. And I'm saying to you, that was a detriment. That was detrimental. That was, and I'm speaking to you. I'm speaking to you as an Indian. That was detrimental. Okay. Now you can, you know, bob and weave and try to defend that and defend, you know, critical support. But I want to remind you, like Rohi said, there were people when that discussion was going on who wanted uncritical support, not just critical support. They wanted to give wholehearted support to the PNC. Read Rohi book. That's what he says.
That is why you had a breakaway with Cheddi Singh, because what Rohi said is correct. Cheddi Singh wanted to have uncritical support. Cheddi was saying that would have been liquidation, that would be liquidating the party, and he couldn't take that position. But let me go back to the origins of this question about the party being a communist party. When did the PPP decide that they had to change? You got to go back to that. After the 1968 elections, when the American CIA were here with the PNC and the UF and rigged the 1968 elections in a massive way, PPP recognized then that they could not get back into power with the kind of party that they had, that it needed a more strong, disciplined, and united party. Because the party up to 1968, 69, 70 was an open party, whosoever will may come. Like it is now, it's gone back to that position right now. But in 1968, it became very clear to the leadership of the party that we had to transform the party into a more fighting force in order for us to get back in power. And that is when, for the first time, because I hear you, even you in some of your writings, I think, if I'm not mistaken, or in your comments, as you said, Cheddi Jagan went to Moscow and went to Cuba. The first time Cheddi Jagan went to Moscow was in 1969, 5 years after he came out of government. 5 years after he came out of government. That was the first visit to Moscow when he went to the conference, when he was invited and accepted to go to the conference in Moscow. And that is when he decided to take a different position, because it was very clear that the Americans and the British will continue to be opposed to him, and he was seeking international alliances as well. So that is how that came about. Secondly, you talk about Indians in a special way, and in a bad way too. You talk, because all of this talk about Indians being passive and don't fight back and don't resist. Let me make this point to you. Look at this is now making a racial analysis for your information, so you can put it in your analysis in the future. Look at from 1838, when Indians arrived here, to independence. There is not a single struggle of any importance that the Indians didn't lead, even before the PPP was formed, even before Jagan came on the scene, even before he was born. There was not a single struggle in our country that Indians did not lead. And that is not because of any special quality of the Indians, but just because they were engaged in the most important, at that time, sugar was more than 90% of our GDP, and that is where they operated in. And therefore, they had to play that role. Even the question of universal adult suffrage was first raised by Indians before Cheddi came on the scene. The British Guyana East Indian Association and the League of Colored People, at that time, two middle-class Indian and Black organizations, and the British Guyana East Indian Association raised for the first time the question of universal adult suffrage. And Indians, and secondly, you talk about the racial question as if it's fixed in stone. But if again you look from 1838 to 1962, there was not a single skirmish between Indians and Africans at that time. I hear that, I know that you and your group and so forth, we used to write and say that Indians were misled at Rumvelt and all of that. But they marched all the way from East Bank, from Diamond, to come to join the waterfront workers' struggle, give solidarity and to be there. Indians and Africans never had a problem up to 1962. The racial problem was clearly engineered by the British. And if you go and read our history properly, and all the documents that are being released now from the various departments, you will see that Sir Patrick Renison, one of his missions was how to try to destroy the PPP. And one of the methods that he used was to encourage racism in the society. And in 1959, when he reported back to London, he wrote a letter and said that he had think that he has succeeded in selling Barnum, making Barnum something that you can think about as a chief minister, although he was very unflattering with some of the terms that he used about Barnum. Because at that time, they were all saying that there was no alternative to the PPP and Cheddi Jagan to govern the country. And he said, unfortunately, we achieved that. And we have now the edge of racism involved in that. So what I'm telling you, that your position is totally wrong, because even if sometimes you're not as explicit as I am saying it now, implicit in all of your writing is that the racial thing is inherent in people and it can't change. Well, it came about at a specific part in our struggle. PPP united the races in the country, and not only in 1953, in the 1957 elections, the PPP got more African votes than the PNC did, than the Barnumite PPP did. We won Linden, we won Buxton, we won all the areas. The only 3 seats that the PNC won in 1957 was North Georgetown, South Georgetown, and Central Georgetown. Bonham, Jainarine Singh, probably one of your heroes, and Andrew Jackson. Those were the three members of parliament for the PNC. So if the PPP has in its views that it is possible to unite the people of this country on the basis of common position of class and nation building and so forth, I think it's because it is in our history, and as you said, history is not dead. History teaches us in the way to go forward.
But nobody's questioning, you know, all of the things you've said about all of these things. Well, obviously, you know, when you look at the history of Indians in these diasporic communities, these places where they went, Guyana stands out. There are two things that I always say. This is the only place where two ships came on the same day and landed on the same day. But more importantly, when you look at the history of Indians in Guyana, it is the only colony where you've got so many rebellions against the plantocracy. But you're very wrong, Donald, when you talk about the fact that people were all, yes, you know, we didn't have the kind of intense problems as we had in the 60s. People were segregated, you know, they were living in different communities and they had issues and so on. But I'm not going to get into all of that. The point is those things became aggravated. Yes, the British played a role. But my point to you is you can't always simply blame everything. The British are not there anymore. And we still have issues which we still have to contend. And you keep saying that that these are Indian races, but let me ask you, why is it so difficult, as Cheddi said, since the 1960s, and you had an ICJ report that was done that says we need to have a balanced disciplinary force, and you're going to have Takuma using the fact that you have an unbalanced force, right, that can fulfill his goals. Why has it taken this long, and why is such a problem to do that? And secondly, if we are so much of a racist, we have been calling year after year after year for this government to put the word Indian in Indian Arrival Day, knowing fully well that it was the PPP parliamentarians that took the word Indian. So why is it when we speak about these things and we call for balance in the force that people like you will say these are Indian nationalists, they're racist?
Talking to me,
what is racist
I never criticize you for that. I never criticize you for that. I believe
but
that
you have, as a president, you have never made any public statements to those things. You have been very quiet. Am I right?
I had so much of other things on my head.
Oh yeah, you were busy being general secretary and president. Okay, well you were busy. So those things are not important. But then if you were not speaking out, why don't you mention those things when you call us Indian nationalists and Indian racists? Why don't you mention these other things that I just mentioned? Or you just want to promote your truth?
Let me come back to why. Let me come back to the why. There's a couple of things. One, because you misrepresent Indians. You created the impression that all Indians are capitalists. You said that Indians shouldn't support Jagan.
I never said that, Donald. And I will ask you the same. Show me where I have written that. Show me where I have written about people. I have written about people who you folks have condemned. Jung Bahadur Singh, who was a guy who was a ship doctor. He was the person that made cremation, made that happen. Balram Singh, you people like to talk about. Let me tell you about Balram Singh. Let me tell you what you did. One second. Let me tell you about Balram Singh, a person who wanted to create a balance in the force. This was a guy who an election was rigged. It was rigged internally. So says Jack Kelshall. You had people like the Benz were involved and other people in the PP. But here's the thing. Here's what I want to say to you. And this is my Indian side coming out now. Listen to me for a second, then you can speak.
No,
this is
but
the person. Okay, I'm gonna do.
I haven't completed my answer to this man, and you're allowing him to cut into me.
Let me just give me a minute. Give me a minute, and you have the floor.
Let's give you a minute, and then you will take as much time as you want.
So let me talk about, and this is why I'm saying to you, the Indian aspect of things seems to be diminished because you seem to want to see Indians who opposed Cheddi and the PPP as enemies. Nobody does that in India when they talk about Gandhi or Martin Luther King, but we do it in Guyana. What I'm saying to you, I want to come back to Balram Singh Rai. Here's a guy, Balram Singh Rai, who you like to talk about, you and Rohi, has served the PPP as Minister of Education and as Minister of Home Affairs. Their election was rigged to put in Brinley Ben because the party needed to show that they needed a black, which is understandable. But my point is this: when the riots broke out on Black, on was it February 16th, Black Friday, Balram Singh Rai was one of the few people who was in the city because he was Home Affairs Minister. He was the one who put Cheddi on a different day in the back of his car and drove him to safety. But here's the point I want to make to you. This is a person who has contributed. He joined the party in 1957 when most of the blacks had migrated because of the split. To this day, the man has written to Cheddi, he has written to Luncheon, he had written to Desmond Hoyt and Bornham. The only two people he said did not respond to him about his parliamentary pension was Cheddi and Roger Luncheon. And he said it's not that he wants the money. He wants to be recognized that he was denied his pension, and he wants that pension to go to the Dharamshala. Anil Nanglal told us, that the law has to be changed, and he will do that. Ralph Ramkaran wrote in his piece, he says, yes, the man was denied his parliamentary pension. So if I talk about Balram Singh Rai, you want to talk about the fact that he left and run. But many other people left the PPP and run and left the country. But that should be a crime, Donald. And that is something you as an Indian should be struggling for.
Let's hear Donald now. Go ahead, Mr. President.
You see also you continue to distort things, and you seem to believe these things yourself. So that's why it's so dangerous. So the first thing I want to say, I want to continue a line. You say that Indians should not support Jagan because
I never said that.
You said in every single thing that you write, implicit is that.
I'm saying he needed to recommend the sentiments.
So you're saying the capitalist, you're saying the capitalist. Let me make this point to you. Indians, 90 or 95% of the Indian people in this country are workers and farmers. Workers and farmers are very small business people.
But they're not communists.
Huh?
But they're not communists. Exactly. And right now, those same rich people you've been fighting against are running the country right now. So
you're cutting it like a Spanish radio station. On the
All right, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
Listen, so the first point I want to make, the question of communism, they supported Jagan because Jagan was representing the working class of this country and the people who took in patriotic position. So don't blame them for supporting Jagan. You can criticize the African working class for not supporting Jagan because they were going against their own interests by not supporting Jagan. But don't blame the Indians for supporting Jagan. The Indian workers had a right to support Jagan because Jagan was fighting for working class position. And therefore, to say that Indians are racial or what have you because they supported Jagan and they are so simplistic in many of your writings because they follow Jagan is nonsense. That's the first point I want to make. Let me come now to Balram Singh Rai. Balram Singh Rai, you say he was a big Indian fighter. In 1950, it is true that Balram Singh Rai worked with Dr. Jagan in 1947 when he was elected first into Parliament. So did Sidney King, so did Sidney King, and so did Ramkaran and many others. But he was one of the people who helped to campaign with Dr. Jagan, with many others, as I said. The second thing about it, in 1953, Dr. Jagan invited him to join the PPP and contest the election on a PPP list. He refused. He went with the NDP, which was the political arm of the League of Colored People. And he contested the elections and he lost his deposit in his own hometown. Ramkaran defeated him. He fought against Ramkaran there, crushed him. When he came to the PPP in 1957, if you said Jagan was a communist, but he was defending all of the communist positions. And when he left, he became anti-communist again. Get it on principle nature demand. Secondly, about that, you think that the fabrication that you all talk about, that PPP rigged the elections against Rai. PPP didn't have to rig the elections against Rai, but Brindley Ben was far more popular than Rai in the PPP.
Yeah, that's a lie. That's a lie. There are people who, there's a booklet written called Democracy Betrayed. I wrote a book on Balram Singh Rai, if you might recall.
Sense, you're right. But let me make this point.
That's not true. That is absolutely untrue. But you want to talk about that. But you have a guy who was a member of the House. You have a guy who was a member of the House of Israel working with the PPP now, but because Rai dilly-dally a little bit, but then joined the PPP after is an issue.
Let me come with dilly-dally. You just like Hamilton Green. Hamilton Green said the Indians at Linden in 1964, they were roughed up a little bit. You say that Balram Singh dilly-dally. The man worked with the CIA and British intelligence. His Justice Party was financed by the British. All of that is coming out. Not my saying that. Look at the documents that are being released now from the...
and of course, Freedom House was getting support from the Rodney Bank and Baroda Bank, and they were getting support from outside too. So what's your point? It was the same America that intervened.
Man, look, the 1962, the regular election that you're talking about. Brindley Ben was the man who organized the PYO. He was the founder of the Progressive Youth Organization that started out after all the disbanding in '53 in 1957. Brindley Ben was one of the most popular leaders in the party. And when I examined this, when I was General Secretary of the PPP and had the opportunity to look at the records, 2/3 of the party group nominated Ben, more than 2/3 of the party group nominated Ben for the chairmanship of the party, less than a third nominated Rai. So why did the PPP have to rig any elections against Rai?
Because they wanted to show that they have multiracial support. Kimani Nehusi is a historian. Kimani Nehusi is a historian, said that Ben had no meaningful support outside.
I'm not finished. You talk about the PPP, all the blacks left the PPP in 1957. That is not true neither. EMG Wilson, C.B. Nunes, Robertson,
not all of them, some of them, but
Hunt, all of these people. What are you talking about? Who left the PPP?
So gentlemen, listen. It's after 9. Let's close up. If you could make some final remarks. First, who want to go first? Ramarak or Donald?
But you had me start. It's the Ramarak. Take the thing this time.
Go ahead, Professor Veteran Ramarak. Final comments.
Well, look. The problem is we keep speaking over each other, and I think it's important to have this kind of conversation. Now, Donald must know that Cheddi is in all of our hearts. We're not saying, that there are things about him that we should not be concerned about. We're saying, look, he's important in our lives, but at the same time, you don't keep him on a pedestal, as I said, and destroying others, because we have a tendency to destroy everyone else. I've given the example of Jang Bahadur Singh. We talked about Balram Singh Rai. We've got people like Hari Prasad who built, well, there you go. So if you don't like them, then they need to be removed. But I think what the legacy that Cheddi...
Let me put it this way. They did absolutely nothing for the working people. Nothing. And you talk about John Bahadur thing and cremation. Did the PPP pass the legislation? Donald,
let me finish it, then you'll have the final word.
He was a surgeon superintendent on a ship. And again, this is the level of respect that you have for Indians. You think because there's a small element of them that is negative, then the entire lifespan of that person, whatever he did, whatever good he did, we ought to throw that out. And that is the difference, I think, between me and you and what we're seeing here today. I'm saying there's some very great things about Cheddi, but I'm also saying there are others on whose shoulders he stood. And we need to recognize that, whether it's good or bad. The other thing I'm saying is we have to have an open mind. right? I give it the reaction here, I guess, was based on a book written by Clemcy Charan. And as I said to you, not everything, that we have to accept. There may be information coming out from the Cuban archive or the Russian archive at some point, which will, manifestly alter our narrative, right? And we have to keep an open mind about that. And I think it's healthy to have a discussion about these ideas. We can't just simply blindly accept everything a person do. In our life and our daily lives, we don't accept everything our parents do. Sometimes we question those things. And it will come to a point where we have to look at that narrative, right? And I think it's crucial to understanding who we are. There are memoirs that are coming out. I mentioned Cheddi Jagan. Moses Bhagwan is writing his memoirs. I'm sure Donald is working on his. Kit Nascimento is working on his memoir. Kit Nascimento. Okay, Kit Nascimento is working on his. There's a book that just came out on Barnum. And so we have to look at all of these narratives as pieces of the puzzle that help us understand who we are as a people. We can't just take one version and say, look, this is all there is, and we have to reject everything out there. We're not knocking Cheddi because of what he stood for. We're saying, look, we respect what he stood for. We like what he did, and all of us benefited. But look, there are some issues here that we can address, right? And it's important for us to understand that. And that is the nature of looking back at our history. People always say we need to look at things in context. Yes, we need to look at things in context, but looking at things in context doesn't necessarily mean that you have all the information you needed to make those analyses. We can look back and reflect, and whatever we can come up with now and today can also help to navigate a future for all of us. We keep knocking the lower class, but if we keep talking about Cheddi, working and representing and for the lower class, look at what's happening in Guyana today. The country is going to be the Dubai of the Caribbean, and I don't see that as the poor people who are controlling the politics and the economics of the country. Now, I would love to hear Donald's position on that. The country has to move forward, and it is those middle class and those upper class people who are going to play that meaningful role, and we see that happening today. So therefore, we have to revise what we say and what we think about what happened in the past. And that's all I'm saying. I'm not here to fight with Donald about who Cheddi was and who he wasn't. I'm saying he's a very prominent one of our heroes, our prominent leaders. We recognize him as that. But there are also others who we need to also recognize and appreciate the work that they did.
Former president.
The problem I have with your positions, all the time that you're writing, is that every single Indian who opposed Jagan, you were trying to make it into a hero. And if you examine them, all that they have done, you write in books about them, but if you examine them, most of them worked against the people of this country. Prashad was the head of the United Force, which was a finance organization, financed to try to destroy the PPP.
He ran the new Guyana company for the PPP, and he built the front. He built the front of Freedom House, the front. He built that. So therefore, he is now a total enemy. He left a legacy for Indians called Prashad Nagar.
All right.
So we can condemn him.
He make a lot of money and it. Don't really tell me. But,
yeah, that's a crime. Okay, but you're living on a pension.
Let him finish up. Let him finish up. We have to go.
Balram Singh Rai was no hero. Balram Singh Rai, as I said, he defended the PPP when he didn't have a quarrel with them. In Parliament and everywhere else, he was talking and very strong in support and so forth. And when he left, he talked about communism. Dishonestly, he talked about those things. He lost to Ben Free and Fair, and he tried to make it look as if he didn't lose to Ben. And I'll give you another example of him. He lost in 1953 to Ramkaran. He lost his deposit. In 1957, he fought the same seat and he won. In 1962, he defeated Sidney King. In 1962, 1961, he fought and he won the seat. 1964, the whole country was one constituency and he didn't get 4,000 votes. So I don't know what you're telling me about this great man, how wonderful he was and so forth. So my problem is there seems to be an inherent, to me, it shows your class position, that you're not a working class man. Even though your father might have been a worker, used to cut cane and so forth, it doesn't make you a working class. In fact, you are opposed to your father's position, because the very fact that you are opposing the man who championed the cause of the working people in this country, there has never been, and I dare say there might never be, a more consistent and strong champion for working people as Cheddi Jagan. Not only working people, and let's talk about the business sector in this country. It was the PPP, under the PPP, the business sector grew. When Cheddi Jagan came on the scene, the business sector was pro-colonialist. They were fighting against Jagan. The Indian business class that arose, developed under Jagan. Jagan built the industrial estate and all of that. He made studies of all the industries that are possible in the country. He shared it with the private sector. And the Indian business people who were developing at that time had to create a junior chamber of commerce, because they were not even allowed in the chamber of commerce at the time. And those were the people who supported Jagan. The patriotic capitalist class supported Jagan, not the old capitalists who were with the colonialists at the time. So what I'm saying is that I don't think that you have any real arguments, because if you talk about if you adopt the arguments of the colonialists and the imperialists about communism, I could show you how flexible that term was, and they were branding anybody.
So Donald, we gotta go, so you're gonna have to leave that some other time, huh?
Other time. But I just want to say that to attack the main champion of the working people of our country reflects your own class position, and even when you to justify some of your racial position, you're saying that Indians didn't have the right to support Jagan, which is utter nonsense.
All right, let's end it now, and unless Dr. Amar have final word, and we gotta go. It's way past time.
No, we've gone way beyond time. So, and I think Donald has a sort of way of looking at things. He's not being flexible, but I think he's misrepresenting the position that we have adopted and that we have taken.
We'll continue this discussion some other time. Thank you, gentlemen.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right, keep well. Good night. Thanks for spending your time with us.
Good night.
Yeah.